Hey everyone, welcome to Halls of Atonement Mythic Plus 2 with Veterans. This is Val, your tank, and we'll be going over a few things tonight. So to keep the length of the video within reason, we're going to go ahead and play the trash at 2 times speed, and we'll play the bosses at 1 time speed. So the first thing to note during this run is that for Mythic Plus you have to obtain a percentage of trash killed over the entire dungeon. Bosses don't count towards it. So you'll see me pull a few extra mobs that perhaps you haven't seen in regular dungeons and whatnot. That's simply to maintain our percentage. Otherwise we have to go back after finishing the last boss and clear him out. The mob that we just killed, that was the Shard of Halkias. There are actually 3 of them in the dungeon, and all 3 of them have to be killed before you can eliminate the first boss. Otherwise he's not targetable and cannot be attacked. The most notable thing about them being the ground effect that we saw during it, and we'll see it during the next 2. All you have to do is avoid standing in it and you'll be fine. There is a fair bit of AoE damage that goes out during that, and our healers will have to keep that in mind. What we're looking at the moment is one of the Hound Masters. There's quite a few of them in the dungeon overall. Anytime you're in an encounter with them or an engagement, they need to be targeted down quickly, as they will buff the hounds that are with them. Another notable mob that's in this pull here is the Depraved Collector. They cast a spell called Collect Sins that should be interrupted. They don't take priority over the Hound Masters, but they are certainly a mob that needs to be controlled or killed quickly. So just keep that in mind during your future runs. So the next notable mob that I'd like to go over is the Gargoyle that's up here on the left. If you're Venthyr, and it's safe to do so, you should always run up and grab him. To do so, it's just a little icon that pops up when you get close to him. There is no downside to him, they simply increase the amount of damage that you put out. So you always want to grab them if possible. A little pointer here. It applies to most any dungeon, but you always want to be mindful of where you're at and what's going on around you, especially as a tank. This dungeon has a few tight spots where you have to be pretty careful about how you pull things. Like this fight here where we're fighting the next Shard of Halkias. There's actually a whole set of mobs, as some of you may know, on the bridge there, and if you're not careful, you'll end up pulling way more than you planned to initially. And in Mythics, especially in the higher tier Mythics, extra mobs can quickly wipe a group. So just be conscious of what's around you. You also want to be conscious of where you can save time. Like right now, we still can't fight Halkias simply because the shards actually take time to remove his shield. So in the meantime, we went ahead and pulled the trash next to the boss fight. So anywhere where you can save a little bit of time, feel free to do so. Alright, so here we have the first boss, Halkias. He does a few notable things, primarily the first one being that there is a red ring around him. You can see it in the video. If you exit that red ring, he will cast a spell on you that causes you to be feared virtually indefinitely, because he continues to repeat hitting you with it while you're outside the ring. It is possible to bring someone back within the ring if you can bring the ring to them, but it's highly unlikely that they will make it back on their own. The other thing, as you can see, is that he's doing Crumbly Slam and throwing glass shards on the ground. The biggest problem with the glass shards isn't so much that they exist, it's that they exist during this phase here. So during refracted sunlight, you have to be able to move around the boss, as you can see. And it can change direction at any time, so you have to be prepared and keep an eye on it. Stay right in between as best you can. He will do 4 glass shards before he does refracted sunlight, or synlight. So it's best to keep note of how many he's cast. And then on his last one, you want to pull him away from all of the glass shards. And all DPS and healers should be aware of this so that they don't get caught out. It is the tank's job, though, to keep an eye on the positioning of everyone and ensure that he doesn't pull the boss so far that they come out of the ring. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward fight. Don't stand in the bat and pew pew. So at this point in the fight, we did notice that one of our team members had gotten feared out. So what we're attempting to do now is get him back within the ring before he pulls some extra mobs. Unfortunately for him, we weren't able to get to him quite in time, as he did get one last fear right after we brought him in. So we went ahead and pulled the boss away simply because we would be capable of finishing it without him, so it was better to let him fight over there on his own rather than pull him into the group and wipe the party. It's unfortunate, but it happens. So this next section of Halls of Atonement has a very densely packed set of mobs. So you want to be careful about how you're weaving through there, not to pull too much extra if you can. One of the notable mobs here is the Stoneborn Reaver. They should be interrupted, controlled. They do have some abilities you can dispel if you can dispel magic. The big thing, though, is that you simply don't want them stunning your tank and getting him locked up so that he's taking full damage. So we're coming up on one of the tighter spots in the dungeon where ideally you weave in between most of the mobs. Right here we end up grabbing a few extra. The main thing to note here, though, are the 2 very large gargoyles. They do actually have a stone form, and you can only pull one. What ended up occurring here, though, is we ended up pulling both of the largest gargoyles along with a group that included a reaver. So if this happens, you want to make sure that you control the Weaver, and tanks you're going to be wanting to pop a lot of cooldowns, moving around a lot if possible. DPS and heals can drop any slows that they have, anything to keep the mobs off you, because as you progress higher in the tiers, +5, +7, +10, kiting and just not taking damage starts to play a major role in it. And even as you're gearing up, it's a good idea to learn how to kite. So the next boss in the dungeon is Echelon, and he has 3 notable abilities. One is Blood Torrent, which we'll see here in a second, where he spawns a pool of blood beneath a player. It does very large amounts of damage very quickly, so you want to avoid it and move out of it as soon as possible. The next one that we just saw is Stone Call. This is where he summons 6 additional adds. They don't hurt too bad, and they're not overly difficult to handle. The way they should be managed, though, is the tank should collect them up and move the boss towards them if need be. Once that's done, they should be cleaved AoE down as close together as you reasonably can. And then he will do a Curse of Stone to the entire party, and he will pick one person to jump on. When he does this, everyone should spread out except for the person who's being jumped on. If it is safe enough for them to do so, they should move in towards the stone fiends that have been DPS down, because after they're DPS, they turn into stone statues that can respawn. The only way to permanently destroy them is to have him leap on them during the Curse of Stone. That's really about it. The only major thing that you need to keep in mind is that if you do begin to get overwhelmed with ads, they will need to be nuked as quickly as possible. So the next two trash pulls in here can be a little rough. This one particularly because you have 3 dogs and 2 houndmasters, and if you don't focus the houndmasters or CC them, the dogs will almost certainly destroy the tank. So just make sure that your DPS focuses on them quickly and nukes them down. The next pull is difficult simply because you have 2 gargoyles in with a couple of casters and some melee. Ideally, the easiest way to handle this pull is to line of sight it like was done in the video. You pull them in, interrupt what you can, nuke them down. Alright, now we're on to Adjudicator Elise. If you have a Venthyr, you should have them go ahead and grab one of the gargoyles before the fight. Elise has 2 interruptible spells, Bolt of Power and Volley of Power. These should be interrupted as much as possible as they do quite a bit of damage. The other mechanics to worry about is the Ghostly Parishioner and the Anima Fountain. Anima Fountain's a fairly simple ground-based AoE that you can move out of. So long as everyone does that, it won't be an issue. The Ghastly Parishioner is an easy one to manage as well. As you can see, the Elise is being tanked near one of the little anima containers there. So long as you do that and all your melee are there with you, if anyone in melee gets targeted, it will drag the Parishioner to the anima container. Once they get close to the container, they get absorbed and they're no longer a threat. So long as you manage the anima containers with the ghosts, don't stand in the anima fountain, and interrupt as much as possible, this is a pretty cake fight. So after it leaves, there's only one more pull, and it's a mini boss. It's Inquisitor Cigar. All of the mobs that you see in the pews are essentially healers for the Inquisitor. He uses their life force to heal his own. So if you have enough DPS, you can focus him and kill him through it. If you don't, though, you have to go through and kill all of the adds before you finish him off. The amount of damage that gets put out during this point isn't a whole lot, so be careful with where you stand and pew pew the guy. Alright, now during this fight I'm going to go ahead and go over a couple of things before we get to the final boss. For dungeons and raiding, there's only actually, I think, 3 significant add-ons that I utilize right now. I use MDI, which is a planning tool for mythic dungeons, so that you can plan out the routes that you're going to take. I use Deadly Boss Mods. This is highly recommended for anyone who wants to push harder content, or even just casual content. It's an indispensable tool that works in virtually every dungeon that I'm aware of. And then the other one I use that you can see in the bottom left-hand side of the screen is Recount. It's simply a meter for measuring DPS, heals, deaths, etc. I do highly recommend checking those out, and I will go ahead and put links to them at the bottom of the video. And now on to Lord Chamberlain. So, Lord Chamberlain's not an overly difficult fight, but there are a few mechanics that can and do hurt. First off, the tank does get hit with a dot. Healers, you should be conscious of this. Tanks, you should make sure that you're popping cooldowns as necessary to survive it. He also does a frontal cone, which we can just see go off. You want to avoid standing in front of that. Then he does telekinetic toss. Picks up a statue and throws it at someone. That one's a little more difficult to not get hit by, so do what you will with it. At 70 and 40%, he does what's called Chamberlain's Chorus. He does telekinetic onslaught, which he's doing right now, where he pulls all the statues to him. Then he does repulsion and throws them all away. The next thing he does, and this is critical, is Ritual of Woe. The red beams there must be intercepted by somebody, otherwise the entire group will take significant amounts of damage. All you have to do is stand in front of it and soak it. And once you've got those few mechanics down, the rest of the fight is rinse and repeat, the exact same thing. It's not an overly difficult one. So here comes the end of our video. If this has helped you, let us know. If there's anything you'd like to see in the future, let me know. I'll see what I can do to work it in. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'm available anytime I'm online, and you can even ping me on Discord. I'll respond as soon as possible. Other than that, good night and good raiding.